So there are other elements that DARPA has very much been on the forefront of. And so it is getting down to, in some cases, how are we changing or how can we change humans? But then it's also mapping humans, and whether that is with the global war on terror and the evolution of kind of the scientists involved in more of a social science approach to fighting terrorism, to also literally humans becoming data points, and some of the programs born out of DARPA's own visions. Can you talk a little bit about that and one of the programs, Total Information Awareness,
Yes.
and how that's evolved to what has become a lot of news in recent years?
So here we're in the realm of what DARPA, or the Pentagon, calls ISR. It's intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance. And it's an idea that actually goes back to the Vietnam War, when DARPA had its first shift, going from these big sort of anti-ballistic missile defense programs to suddenly being sent into the jungles of Vietnam and being asked to create different weapon systems to fight the insurgents, particularly on the Ho Chi Minh Trail. And this idea sprang forth of sensor technology. And at the time, it was so rudimentary. It was like guys, and I interview these guys in the book, that are flying in low and slow over the Ho Chi Minh Trail. Incredibly dangerous. In one situation, these guys are shot down, and they're rescued in this very dramatic way. Because what they were doing is they're dropping out of the aircraft and helicopters these giant sensors that are like this big. They're kind of shaped like a dart, and they're supposed to literally fly out of the aircraft, land on the ground in a string, and then the electronic information gets relayed up to a helicopter that's flying in a racetrack formation overhead. And then that information gets relayed back to what was called an information center in Thailand, where soldiers are using these new technologies, this is back in 1965, 66, called computers, to try and create algorithms to figure out what these Ho Chi Minh fighters are doing on the trail, where they're headed, what they're going to attack next. I mean, this technology was laughed at the Pentagon, by the way. But of course, this is now
exactly what we know as surveillance, as the big surveillance network
that you referred to. And we saw this program again in the war on terror, when DARPA ran into a lot of trouble publicly when it created a system called the Total Information Awareness program. And that was this idea to use sensor technology to monitor American citizens, to look at their credit card transactions, to look at the library books they take out, to monitor who they're talking to try and create, with computers which are now very sophisticated and algorithms which have gotten much more sophisticated with help from NSA, etc., to then use this system of systems to find not the Ho Chi Minh fighter on the trail, but rather the terrorist among us. And so you can see how one technology decades later becomes this other incredible DARPA technology. And that is very much what we have now in the surveillance systems that are going on.
So over the course of DARPA's history, there has been, with some of its inventions, with some of its programs, there has been pushback. One was this Total Information Awareness that eventually got splintered off into the NSA and PRISM and a variety of other programs. Can you recount some of the other experiences or the other incidents in the past that DARPA has really had to has had to either sweep under the carpet or in some ways fix its public image?
Its image, yes. I mean, after the Vietnam War, an interesting thing happened. There's this perception that there was it wasn't a perception, it was a reality that there was a downsizing of the military per se, which there was. DARPA got in big trouble for doing what was called pre-requirement research, for creating weapon systems that were ahead of the time when in fact we needed to be, fighting this war in Vietnam that we lost. And so DARPA was punished. It got kicked out of the Pentagon, that sort of coveted place to be, and sent several miles away, where it is now in Arlington, Virginia. They had a couple moves. But so DARPA kind of got its wrist slapped, and there was a moment with many of the people who were there at the time talking about how, they thought maybe the agency would be folded. But that's not what happened. In fact, the opposite happened, which is that suddenly DARPA got an influx of money thanks to the Secretary of Defense, Harold Brown, who was the first scientist in the Pentagon to be Secretary of Defense. Brown had been in charge of all the DARPA technology during the Vietnam War, specifically the sensor technology. And Brown created an entire industry behind this idea of information technology, behind the idea of nanotechnology, which is the art of making things small, that all of these sensor systems could be shrunken down. And so even though the public perception was that DARPA was in trouble, DARPA had created Agent Orange during the war. So there was a real idea of banishment, and yet, in fact, the agency flourished.